In my freshman year of high school, I bought an NES for 50 bucks. Having an itch of nostalgia for an era I was decidedly not around for, I already knew what the first game I wanted to play was. Another 10 bucks, and a few days later, I was excitedly plugging everything into our old CRT and playing what is possibly the single most important title in video game history, Super Mario Bros. This was the game that would spark my interest in the retro scene and teach me to fall in love with game design. Many years later, having spent several of those years studying games in school and even making a few, I still find myself returning to this beloved entry in 8-bit gaming. I'd like to re-examine it after all this time and see if the history, design, and impact this game had still make it worth talking about 40 years later. Hey, hi, and hello everyone. My name is Spacy, and welcome to a review in context. Once upon a time in 1980, there was an underperforming game called Radar Scope, made by a relatively unknown company, Nintendo. Radar Scope was sort of a mix between Galaxian and Space Invaders, and it was not doing well. Nintendo of America's first president, Miyamoto had put in an ambitious order of 3,000 cabinets for the game. They'd only go to sell around 1,000, leaving them with over 2,000 arcade machines just sitting in a warehouse. Asking for help, Arakawa requested that Hiroshi Yamauchi, the president of Nintendo of Japan, send over a game conversion kit, a new game that would use the same hardware in the cabinets but actually sell. Now, at the time, Nintendo had the licensing rights to Popeye, so the idea that a young Shigeru Miyamoto would pitch was one where you played as Popeye trying to rescue olive oil from Pluto. Unfortunately, they would end up losing the license partway through development, and so this was pivoted to be about original character Jumpman trying to rescue his girlfriend Pauline, known at the time as just Lady, from his pet ape, Donkey Kong. This would later lead to a lawsuit from Universal Studios about the use of the name Kong, which would in turn lead to the birth of Kirby, but that's a story for another time. Regardless, Jumpman was born. Jumpman was a character Miyamoto had originally named Osan, meaning middle-aged man, who would then be renamed to Mr. Video before finally setting on Jumpman during the development of Donkey Kong. Side note, Miyamoto actually had this plan where he wanted to use Mr. Video in every game he made, something inspired by how Alfred Hitchcock cast himself in all his own movies and how manga artists of the time like Osamu Tezuka and Fujio Akatsuka would often have recurring characters appear in multiple different series they worked on. Would have definitely made some of his other titles interesting to say the least. Anyway, the creation of Jumpman's iconic look would be born almost entirely out of hardware limitations. Famously, the reason he'd be given a mustache was because the only way to visibly separate the nose from the mouth was to just remove the pixels there and make it look like he has facial hair. He was given a hat because hair was hard to animate with pixels, and he wore overalls and white gloves, as those were the only clothing items Miyamoto could think of that would make the arms appear visibly distinct from his chest, so movement could be seen. Even his job was designated as a result of other circumstances. Because of the original Popeye idea, the game was already set on a construction site, and since Jumpman would be using a hammer to destroy barrels, he must therefore be a carpenter. Miyamoto would later note that the overalls made him look more like a plumber, so a career change would be in order. And as we all know, plumbing is the job that stuck. That still leaves us with the name itself, Mario. Now this does not come from a hardware limitation, but rather a financial one. The story goes that Nintendo of America was a bit behind on their rent for one of their warehouses in Seattle. The landlord, Mario Segali, came by one day, demanding they pay up. I couldn't actually find any definite answer about whether it was a joke or a deal they worked out, but for one reason or another, the character was named after the rent collector and history was made. I mentioned his occupation change from carpenter to plumber. That decision would play a major part in inspiring their next game, Mario Bros. This game featured an almost labyrinthian-like structure with brick floors, green pipes, and wraparound walkways. It was the structure itself that would lead fellow developer Gunpei Yokoi to suggest that Mario hit enemies from the floor below to knock them out. This was proving to be too easy though, and a change was made, requiring players to run into the enemy after flipping them over to knock them away. That decision would lead to the use of turtles as the primary enemy. After all, what animal would be able to survive getting knocked over but take some time to flip themselves upright? A turtle, of course. After development, they realized it didn't really make sense that landing on top of the turtle would hurt the player though. To quote Miyamoto, if you did that, the turtle would come out the worst from it, wouldn't it? So we decided that if we had the chance to make another Mario game, we'd definitely have it so you could jump on turtles all you want. And that's exactly what they did in their next game, Super Mario Bros. A quick timeline recap, because all of that happened in just a few years. Radar Scope was released in 1980, Donkey Kong in 81, and Mario Bros in 83. So far, this has all just been in arcades. Home gaming has been around for a few years at this point, but Nintendo hadn't yet gotten involved with it. They would release the Famicom exclusively in Japan in 1983, but it wouldn't be seen overseas for another couple of years. In the meantime, America was dealing with something else. The video game crash of '83. There's a lot going on there that isn't particularly relevant to our story today, but I'll give you the basics. So, companies like Atari were finding some pretty decent success in the home console market. This was a bit before the time that hardcore licensing and publishing restrictions were established, so anyone and everyone was making video games for these consoles and just flooding the market with these terrible, thrown together, rushed products. This is also before the time of mainstream internet usage, so you really had no idea which games were good. You'd just be buying games based on what had the coolest cover, since there wasn't anything else to go on. Now, the market was flooded with terrible games, and so people just stopped buying them altogether. This led to the infamous ET dump in New Mexico, but again, story for another time. All was not lost though, as you might have gathered by the likely multiple home consoles you have by your own TV. Nintendo was here to save the day. But first, they needed a game. It's currently the end of 1984, or possibly the beginning of 1985. Shigeru Miyamoto has now made a few games for Nintendo, and he was no longer the sole developer. Miyamoto, along with Takashi Tezuka, had recently developed a game called Devil World, and a second game known in America as Kung Fu. Miyamoto had also developed the game Excitebike with engineer Toshihiko Nakago. I mentioned these games specifically because, along with Ice Climber and Balloon Fight, they would become primary inspirations for what was to be their next title, Super Mario Bros. At this time, Nintendo had plans to release the Famicom in America. The look of it was going to change, and it was to be called the Nintendo Entertainment System, or the NES for short. Nintendo also had plans for a disk system add-on. This was at the time only set to be released for the Famicom and would allow games to be played from floppy disks. Players could then go to stations around Japan and get new games on their disks. This didn't end up taking off and never even got released in America, but at the time, they thought it was going to be the next big thing. So before it came out, they wanted one last cartridge game for the console, a swan song for the Famicom. Miyamoto, along with Tezuka and Nakago, were going to go all out. This is where those games I mentioned earlier come into play. Miyamoto loved the large sprites used in Devil World, a game which never came out in America, though you might recognize the devil himself from his assist trophy in Super Smash Bros. Knowing he wanted to use a large sprite though, he asked programmers to come up with a 16 by 32 pixel block, just moving and jumping around a screen. This was to be the basis of Super Mario. Now the next two titles I mentioned, Excitebike and Kung Fu, were part of a game genre Miyamoto had termed athletic games. As part of the whole Swan Song deal, this new game was to be the final installment of this trilogy. From Kung Fu, he loved the bright blue background. This was at a time when most games used pure black backgrounds, so this was going to stand out. At one point in the early stages of development, after they had just put in the blue background and saw it with the white clouds and the ground, it all just jumped out at them. It was quite late in the evening, but Nakago ran straight to the phone and immediately called Miyamoto to tell him, "We've come up with something amazing." Like Kung Fu, Excitebike also heavily featured side-scrolling, as well as the ability to select which track you wanted to play on startup. This would later get worked into the famous Warp Zone from Super Mario. But for now, they wanted to implement the side-scrolling. Having already developed the game engine in Excitebike, they took that scrolling and added it to the new block-based title. Because they were using the code from a racing game, they were also able to apply that easy acceleration of Mario's ability to both walk and run, instead of forcing him to move at a constant speed like in Donkey Kong and Mario Bros. That wasn't the only thing they took though. As part of development, they needed to make sure the console could handle processing both music and sound along with the movement. The NES wasn't exactly an intensive machine, so it was really important to test the stuff during development. So before they had the final music and sound effects made, they'd use placeholders. So they'd be playing Mario with the soundtrack to Excitebike, and every time Mario would jump, instead of the traditional sound they'd add later on, Mario would actually rev like a dirt bike. The last two games considered inspirations offered a bit less, but still some things worth mentioning. Kazuaki Morita, a programmer for Ice Climber, considered the game to be a warm-up before moving on to Super Mario. If we take a look, there are a few similarities in the jumping and the brick-breaking that appear in both games. From Balloon Fight, the physics system of flying through the air was adapted into the underwater levels, allowing Mario to seemingly swim through space. And I'm not too sure where this last part was coming from, but at one point, there were also ideas to have Mario flying on a cloud like Sun Wukong and shooting with a beam rifle. The controls would have changed too, with up on the D-pad becoming jump and A becoming an attack button where you'd kick if you were unarmed. There was also an idea to ride a dinosaur-like thing that looks vaguely like the pterodactyl from Ice Climber. This, of course, would later become Yoshi, and even the cloud riding shooting section would find its home in Super Mario Land. That's actually a pattern you'll see with Miyamoto. He'll save ideas from one game and use them in another game where they better fit. Back to our block character. While trying to decide who to replace it with, Tezuka went next door and asked the head of sales and marketing to show him some current sales figures. Keep in mind, Tezuka was still in his first year at the company, and he was just asking the head of sales to just show him the data. Of course, the sales head went ahead and did just that. Tezuka saw that Mario Bros. Was still selling consistently well and suggested to Miyamoto they use Mario. It's certainly possible that Miyamoto already had Mario in mind, since he did have that plan to use Mr. Video in every game he'd make, but Tezuka suggesting it was what cemented its usage. What was going to become the ultimate cartridge game had all its pieces in place. All they had to do now was start putting it together. The actual process of getting game from paper to program back then was way different. For starters, they were still thinking in terms of screens. For example, Donkey Kong has 4 unique screens. Each level took place on one screen, but they wanted Super Mario Bros. To be a side-scroller. So when designing the level maps, they were thinking, if you laid screens side by side, how many screens long would it need to be? Miyamoto wanted the level to take around a minute to complete. It takes just about a second to run across the screen, so initially, Nakako was worried they were going to be making 60 screens per level. Miyamoto then told him, we're going to have all sorts of things going on in between, so 20 screens should be enough for a single level. Though in the end, they'd only use about 12 on average, with the longest being an exception at a whopping 32 screens. Now, the actual making of these levels had to be done completely manually, meaning they would use graph paper to sketch the level designs in blocks, and the programmers would have to painstakingly enter that data by hand. They were still coding in assembly back then, which, if you've never done, I do not recommend. It is an absolute pain. You're literally thinking in bits and writing things out to load and store bytes in specific registers, which is incredibly tedious to do at all, let alone to do it correctly. Every time they'd change a level map, even by just a little bit, tons of little changes have to be made by hand to the code. Nakako has said that he'd come to work, get handed 20 sheets of paper, and be told to get on with it. That would take all day, and then around 10 at night, they could finally test to see if that's what they wanted, and then the next morning, give new notes and start the process over. To reiterate that, they could test their changes once a day. Maybe twice if they were small changes. Compare that to today's game dev cycle of hundreds of changes and immediate testing. You just change a few numbers, drag some pieces around, and just run it again. You don't have to burn it to a ROM just to see if it worked, but that was how it was back then. That's just where the technology was at. In fact, just to really emphasize what they were working with, let's take a quick look at the actual size of the game. The entire thing, that big 5" by 5" cartridge, held only 40 kilobytes of data. That's 32 kilobytes for the programming itself and 8 for the sprites. This screenshot of the game is bigger than that. Let that sink in. That's how incredible these guys were at saving space when making this. They were constantly reusing sprites and sound effects in creative ways, like how the clouds and the bushes are the same sprite recolored, or the getting hit sound effect is the same as the pipe sound effect. And they used all 40 kilobytes available. Normally they leave about 100 bytes left over for random testing and debugging, but they even used all of that. Every time they found a new way to save space, Miyamoto would get excited at the prospect of adding even just a few more blocks to levels. The Goomba was actually born out of the limited space constraints as well. The Goomba is such a simple enemy, even the walking animation is just them flipping the sprite back and forth. It was space-saving tricks like this that let them put in as much game as they did. Another fun fact about the Goomba, in addition to it being so simple for space reasons, it was also done because playtesters thought the Koopa Troopa was a tricky thing to encounter right in the beginning. And if you look at it, it kind of is. You have to figure out that jumping on it is what you're supposed to do, but jumping on it puts it in a shell. Then landing on that shell again sends it flying away just to bounce back at you and kill you. But if a Goomba gets hit, it's just gone. Plus, that teaches you that jumping on enemies is good, but we'll talk about that later. The last thing I'll mention on the size of the game is that at the very end, Koji Kondo, the composer, didn't use all the space allotted to him for the music. He was able to get something to loop with just 40 bytes, leaving them with an extra 20. Miyamoto saw this and knew they couldn't have anything left open, so he decided to add one last sprite, a crown, to display only if the player was able to get 10 or more lives. With all that finally done, the game was ready to be released. It came out on September 13th, 1985 in Japan, and October 18th, 1985 in America, right alongside the NES. The 19th? Or the 12th? Or November 17th and March of 86, and one report of an arcade version coming out in 1984. Okay, that one's definitely not right. Full development didn't even begin until 85, according to Miyamoto himself, so we can rule that one out at least. Okay, but hold on. We know the NES came out on October 18th. Why don't we know when Mario came out? Well, you see, depending on where you look, you'll find a lot of conflicting information about the American release date. Part of this confusion probably came from the fact that they originally only had a test launch for the NES before they went national. This resulted in a smaller sample size and less records of it. Some reports say that Super Mario wasn't a part of the test launch at all and didn't actually come out in America till 1986. This is likely untrue though, as there's way more evidence for 1985. Even Nintendo supports this. Anywhere Nintendo has published an official release date, they list it as October 18th of 85. And there is a lot of evidence to support that date. The NES was supposedly launched with 17 titles, according to Ed Semrad, a reporter from the time. That list of 17 included Super Mario Bros. There's also a Macy's ad from November 17th that gives the same list of games as well as a warranty card giveaway thing where people who bought the NES could submit the card to try to win one of the launch games with Super Mario being listed on it. There's also a US copyright filing of the game with the date of publication listed as October 19th. Now, these copyright days aren't always 100% accurate and often vary by a day or two, many of which will be just one day after the actual launch date, so the 18th seems pretty likely. Things get weird when you start talking to people, though. The vice president of sales at Nintendo of America at the time was a man named Bruce Lowry. According to him, the game had a ship date of October 18th. Now that could mean the game came out on the 18th, or it could mean it literally shipped out on the 18th and wouldn't get to stores until maybe the next day. Another employee from the time, Gail Tilden, recalls them all hiding behind pillars to watch the first sale and afterwards celebrating with a Bloody Mary. But she then goes to say that she never would have had a Bloody Mary on a workday, and therefore she's quite certain it wasn't Friday the 18th. She seems positive it'd have to be on a Saturday, either the 12th or the 19th, but that's not all. An anonymous and supposedly reliable tipster cites an internal database giving the NES a ship date of October 18th, but Super Mario Bros. A different ship date of November 17th, which also happens to be the exact date of the Macy's ad I mentioned previously, which also happens to be the first time Super Mario Bros. Itself received an advertisement, so I don't know! We just don't know when this game came out! Frank Cafaldi does an incredible deep dive into this at GameDeveloper.com that I think should be linked in the I button right now and is definitely in the description at least. That's where I got most of this story from, but he goes a bit more in depth on things I skimmed on. I highly recommend looking it over. It was a cool read. At the very least, we seem confident about the Japan release date, which really is the only one we'd go off of anyway for anniversaries and the like, but it's still just baffling that we didn't keep track of this. If you're wondering why that is, I'll remind you that the video game crash of '83 was still being felt. There just wasn't a news market for games at the time after they all crashed and burned and were buried in some cases. Regardless, the launch of the NES and Super Mario Bros. Was an absolute success. That can be attributed to a few things actually. Cafaldi's article touches on this as well, but part of Nintendo of America's marketing strategy was promising stores that they would buy back any unsold merchandise. In fact, they'd even come in and set up the stands and show people what it was themselves. All the stores would need to do is give them the space. They were so confident that if people could actually play it, they'd be sold. Another part of this was that they were marketing the NES as a toy, instead of as a computer like previous consoles. This was done by bundling the original console with our good friend here, Rob the Robot. It's a little toy robot that actually interacts with a couple of the games. You'd input something and the screen would flash a certain way, and receivers in Rob would get that message and move him in response. It's actually a really cool little toy, and not something we see much anymore. We have Toys to Life stuff, sure, but nothing that actually interacts with the real world to play. They also had a zapper included, which is a little light gun that can shoot the TV to play the game. That's not exactly how it works, but that's what it felt like, and it's also a pretty nifty thing. We'd see more variations of that with future Nintendo consoles, but this was one of the first. And of course, none of this would have worked if the games themselves weren't good. Super Mario Bros. Was flying off the shelf to the point that they later released a version of the console that included the game as a pack-in over Rob. We'll talk more about the impact later on, but for now, how about we dive into the game itself and actually see what it was that saved home consoles and revitalized the industry as we know it. In an interview with Vox, Miyamoto talked a bit about his design philosophy, highlighting three important focuses: story, simplicity, and immersiveness. When he refers to story, he means that a game needs a sense of accomplishment, a sense that you have done something so that you get the sense of satisfaction of completing something. This doesn't need to be anything extensive, something as simple as rescuing the princess, for example. Simplicity refers to the simple goal of the game. In Mario, you have to reach the end of the level. In Donkey Kong, you have to climb to the top. It's not explicitly said, but I would add to this that the means in which you do it shouldn't be too complex either. You move and you jump. At its core, that's all these games are. His final remark was on immersiveness. You need to feel like you've become the hero, that you've become brave, even if you're actually crying. Those are the three tenets to Miyamoto's design philosophy. Super Mario Bros. Of course hits all of these, but for a platformer, I'd like to tweak their definitions just a bit. For story, the fun in a platformer comes from the movement. That's the way you're interacting with the game after all, but having a reason to move right, a reason to play the game is just as important. Now that why can be a few things, and often it's different for different people playing the same game. It might be to get the highest score, fastest time, but for the casual, there's usually a story reason to play. You'll find that telling someone to play a game just to reach the goal versus telling them to save the princess by reaching the goal create different feelings in the player. As Miyamoto says, the latter creates a sense that you've done something. It creates a satisfaction in completing it. I'm going to change his second tenet of simplicity to be more movement focused. Controls in a platformer need to be simple. You need to be able to just pick up the controller and go. If there's a gimmick, like a mid-air dash for example, it has to feel natural and almost instinctual to do. And the movement needs to feel predictable and consistent. Deaths should feel like your fault. It wasn't the game being unfair, it was you who missed that jump. But it's not discouraging. You miss the jump, but you know you can hit it, so you try again. When the movement is unfair, you get frustrated instead of determined. It pushes you away instead of encouraging you to try again. Miyamoto's last tenet was on immersiveness. I'm going to expand that to be about the level design. The level is a new world. It looks interesting and thematic. It's immersive in a way that sucks you into the world. It makes you want to be there, or maybe it creates a sense of dread and makes you want to keep moving just to get out of it. But it makes you want something. It invokes a response in the player, and the level design itself treats the player with respect. The challenges it presents require your attention, but they're not unfair. You can't just passively play and expect to win. That level of attention, combined with the player's response to the world, are what create the immersive element here. Those are my tenets for a platformer, and that's what we're going to analyze. So let's dive into the story. Now, you're probably thinking, it's Mario. What do you mean analyze the story? Surely it's just save the princess from Bowser, right? And yes, you are right. But there's a little more to it than just that. In fact, the game manual provides a brief description of the story, which I'll share with you now.
One day, the kingdom of the peaceful mushroom people was invaded by the Koopa, a tribe of turtles famous for their black magic. The quiet, peace-loving mushroom people were turned into mere stones, bricks, and even field horsehair plants, and the mushroom kingdom fell into ruin.
That's right, you heard that correctly. Every brick you break, every block you shatter, every, field horsehair plant, these things that you walk past, those were all previously citizens of the Mushroom Kingdom. And it's never said whether they remain alive as you scatter pieces of them about for just a few points. In fact, it's encouraged. One of the top secret tips in the manual reads, you get 50 points for each brick you smash, and to try punching lots of different places. I digress.
The only one who can undo the magic spell on the mushroom people and return them to their normal selves is the Princess Toadstool, the daughter of the Mushroom King. Unfortunately, she is presently in the hands of the great Koopa Turtle King. Mario, the hero of the story, maybe.
Maybe? What does that even mean, maybe? Now, game manuals, NES ones especially, might do little things here and there to mislead the player for one reason or another. For example, all references to Samus in the original Metroid manual refer to them with he/him pronouns. It's all a big secret that Samus is actually a woman, unless you beat the game fast enough and get the special end screen. So seeing them questionably refer to Mario as a hero and planting that seed of doubt in the player brings up a lot of questions. There's nothing in the game to suggest otherwise, it's just a few weird lines here and there in the manual. The rest of the story is what you'd expect.
Mario hears about the mushroom people's plight and sets out on a quest to free the mushroom princess from the evil Koopa and restore the fallen kingdom of the mushroom people. You are Mario! It's up to you to save the mushroom people from the black magic of the Koopa.
But I want to focus on one more line later on. There's a section in the manual dedicated to all the enemies in the game with brief descriptions for each. The little Goomba has a noteworthy one.
A mushroom who betrayed the mushroom kingdom.
Betrayed? The manual said it was a kingdom of peaceful mushroom people. It even doubles down on the next line, calling them the quiet, peace-loving mushroom people. Seems to me like all this peace talk might just be some propaganda being pushed on by the mushroom monarchs. Maybe there was already a revolution in progress by the time Bowser showed up, and that was just the event that pushed things over. Then our maybe hero Mario comes along, murdering every brick he can shove his fist into, just to save the princess and restore the status quo. Bet you didn't expect to get in the ramifications of a failed revolution that's going to be moving to the right. So, as far as stories go, there's definitely more than meets the eye if you dig into it, but for most players, the story is just going to be save the princess. And honestly, that's enough. The goal is simple, it's straightforward, and most importantly for games back then, it sounds almost easy? Like, yeah, it's just move right and jump, and you'll save the princess. And that's where Miyamoto gets ya! Let's look at the movement and the controls, because these are critically important. Like I said, this is how you're interacting with the game, and they nailed it. The controls feel incredibly tight and deceptively simple. You just move with the D-pad and press A to jump. But then, there's also sprinting with the B button. And you can slide if you crouch, and you quickly learn this game has momentum physics, which lets you do this cool trick where you can keep jumping without holding right and you still just fly. Then there's fireballs and stars, and there's so much more you can do with just a D-pad and 2 buttons. Almost every review I found universally praises this. These controls are the definition of easy to learn and incredibly fun to master. It's approachable, and it's all you end up needing. But if you end up putting in the time, you get to figure out all that cool tech I mentioned. The manual encourages that kind of discovery too. In the top secret trick section, it talks about bulldozer attacks and chain reaction techniques, more commonly known as turtle runs and chaining jumps when people talk about it. The game is filled with these extra techs you can figure out, and they all seem to make sense because of how simple the controls are. The game presents 3 buttons and lets you add them together in any way you want. But if it feels overwhelming when I list them all off like that, it's okay. It's totally optional and just ways to have more fun with it in your own time. Let's talk about the levels themselves. Super Mario Bros. Features 32 levels found in 8 worlds with 4 levels per world. It's worth noting that there are actually only 27 unique levels and 5 pairs of duplicate level designs, with a second appearance of each featuring more enemies. It's a neat way to save space on the cartridge while also presenting a naturally more difficult challenge. Anyway, the levels in this game are incredible. I'd like to stress that this kind of stuff was pretty revolutionary for the time. I said before, Donkey Kong has just 4 screens. Pac-Man only has the 1. To then make a game that has 32 whole levels, each with anywhere from 12 to 32 screens, is insane. Of course, the only way to see all these levels is to start at the beginning, with the most famous level of all time, World 1-1. Now, there are 1,000 videos analyzing 1-1 and how it tutorializes a basic level without people even realizing it. And there's about to be 1,001, baby! It wouldn't be a comprehensive video on Super Mario Bros. If we didn't! Let's do this! So, 1-1. Legitimately the most famous level of all time and what is possibly the most genius tutorial level ever. There's no annoying text boxes telling you what to do or forcing you to do things before you can play the game. The game just starts. More specifically, it starts you right here, on the far left side of the screen. And already a clever move has been made. Nothing has happened and the player instinctively knows they're supposed to go right. After all, they started on the far left and there's this huge open space to the right. And even if the player tried going left first, they'd hit an invisible wall. So, without a word being spoken, the player advances right, the way they're going to be moving for the rest of the game. Now, the player has started to advance, when all of a sudden, whoa, what the heck is that thing? It's marching towards me so menacingly, so unrelentless. Guess that was bad. And bam, the game just taught you a thing. Specifically, that guy was bad. At this point, you've lost a life, and you're back at the beginning, about 10 squares away from where you just died. So you learned something, and the consequence was absolutely minimal. It's perfect, but this little Goomba is still coming at you. So, in a frantic rush to avoid getting hit again, you start mashing the other 2 buttons on the controller, and you jump. In fact, it's not impossible, but rather likely even that you jumped on top of it, and it vanished. And you got points! Well, okay then. Looks like you know how to handle these guys next time you see them, and beyond that, you learned how to jump. Now, you're standing next to a flashy block. It certainly looks interesting and doesn't appear to be threatening, so you interact with it the only way you know how. You jump. And money comes out. Your little counter went up and everything. Miyamoto actually said at one point they were trying to figure out what to put in the boxes. They could use fruit or something, but he had to think of something everyone likes. And the conclusion he came to was money, of course. Awesome, you got money. And would you look at that? There's more blocks right here. They aren't all flashy though, but let's try interacting with them anyway. Okay, that didn't seem to work. Let's try this flashy one, and no, holy heck, what is that? Now in this moment, there's a few things you might be thinking. You might notice that this mushroom is moving to the right, the same way Mario is going. That might be enough to tell you it's a good thing. It also came out of the money box, but this could be a trick. After all, that other mushroom thing was evil. I better avoid just to be safe, and oh my god, it hit the pipe. It's coming right for you, and you panic jump. But the block's over you, smack you right down into it, and oh, hey, you're not dead. Better than that, you've doubled in size. And that right there is the genius right in the beginning of the level. You're shown how to handle bad guys with the unavoidable Goomba. You're shown that flashy blocks are good and have good things in them. You're shown a mushroom and the pipe it bounces off of, coupled with the blocks above your head, make it almost impossible for a new player to avoid, so you get shown that it's a power-up. The unavoidable mushroom is such a clever move. Miyamoto and Iwata have talked about how every time they explain that to someone, they give this oh my god reaction that's just perfect, and that alone was why I had to cover this level. But let's keep going, there's plenty of cool stuff here. Up next is a series of pipes growing in height. This forces you to find your maximum jump height by holding down the A button. That teaches you your limits, and also that you have variable jump heights depending on how long you hold the button. And you even get 2 shots at the highest one to really hammer it in. But before you get to the second tall one, you get 2 Goombas walking back and forth. You haven't seen this before, so you take a second to watch. It's the perfect spot to see how enemies interact with each other. And unless you had a running start, you can't jump the gap to the next pipe, so you have to jump right in. And knowing that you can kill these guys by jumping on them, you might even try to take one of them out. This can be a great spot to show you that they even turn around after bumping into the flattened Goomba, or it might show you that you can bounce along the top of one onto the other in one motion. Both great things to learn. Regardless, you've made it past another obstacle, but now you're being presented with the deadliest challenge yet, a bottomless pit. Your gamer sense tingles. You don't want to fall in there, so you get a running start to jump it, and horribly mistime it. But hey, that's okay. Miyamoto put in a failsafe. Instead of sailing right into the pit, you actually find a secret block containing a 1-up. Not only did Miyamoto save your life with that, he gave you an extra one. And seeing as how you thought to jump that early, you're probably going to need it. After you do clear the gap though, we've got another interesting situation. 2 Goombas walking off blocks. This is another great showcase of how enemies interact with the environment. Goombas will walk right off edges, and if you're quick, you can see what happens when you bump bricks with them on top, and possibly discover that it takes them out. On top of that, if you've been skilled enough to retain your mushroom up till now, you're rewarded for it with the legendary Fire Flower. It came out of that question block, so it's probably good. Upon grabbing it, Mario flashes for a moment and then retains a new color palette. You've only got one other button left, so let's try it, and whoa, you're shooting fireballs! Jump in a gap, you also have 2 more enemies quickly encroaching on you. A rapid double tap gives you the chance to practice and hopefully quickly dispose of them. Now, you're stood at an interesting spot. There's just a single lone block here. Having had practice with destroying blocks by now, you go to give it the same treatment and find a coin? Not only that, but the block hasn't broken or changed to the dark brown the previous ones did. So you hit it again, and again, and again, until it finally does change, and you've gotten a cool 10-ish coins out of it. Awesome. Now you know that coins can be hidden in regular bricks too. You see 2 more next to you, so you give them the same hits when suddenly, a star! This is new and you just have to have it. Carefully avoiding or dispatching the approaching Koopa, who we'll talk about in a moment, you grab the star and start flashing rapidly. And not only that, a new song starts playing. Invincibility isn't anything new to games, but if you're unsure as to what it is, you might try landing on one of the enemies coming up and see that you seem to phase right through them, yet they still die. You get a few more to try it out on before it vanishes, but there's a good chance you figured it out at least. Or maybe you missed the star entirely. Maybe you got caught up by this new turtle enemy coming right at you. You try to take him out the same way you eliminated the Goombas, and you seem to bounce, and the shell remains. As you come down again, you're likely to kick the shell. It goes flying, and you might be fast to run after it and see it plow through 6 more Goombas before hitting a block and ricocheting right back at you. It's a great spot to experiment and learn how things work because, guess what? Even if you get hit and die here, you just got a checkpoint right before the Koopa encounter. It's like they knew this would be a spot that might cause some deaths as players learn the game or something. That checkpoint is also located just after where you got the Fire Flower, meaning there is a small punishment for dying here in that you can't go back for it. But all is not lost, for in the flashing pyramid of question blocks, another mushroom lies. It's perfect. Scooting ahead just a little more, we have one last teachable moment. Stair steps up and down with a safe little 2-block ground between them. A nice little area to practice the upcoming jump if you need it and prepare you for the real thing. To give you a little more help, they even throw in an extra column before the death pit in case you need a running start. This lands you safely behind a pipe guarding 2 more Goombas before the final staircase to the end. Even this section is trying to tell you to jump for the top of the flagpole without words. The grand staircase before it just affords that want to leap off. Even if you're suspicious of the flag and you try to jump over it, you'll find it's perfectly spaced that it's impossible to do so, landing you safely on top for a maximum of 5,000 points and an advancement to the next level. Even the beginning of 1-2 is trying to teach you. This level starts by walking Mario into a pipe and falling into the next level. You might think back to all those pipes in the last level and wonder if you can go down any of those. This is the only thing I'd want to change in this near perfect level. Upon playing 1-1 again and checking pipes, you'll find the first 3 pipes are just regular pipes. It's not until the 4th one that you find a secret area filled with coins that also skips most of the level. To me, not having the first pipe be the secret one might be discouraging. You know, a player could try up to 3 times and not get anything, whereas if you make the first one a secret pipe, now they're checking every pipe for the rest of the game, but that's my only critique. So that was 1-1. Definitely the most important level since it's the first one any player encounters. Most people at the time didn't really read the manual that came with the game, so it was critical that players were taught how to play as best as it could be in the game. But this isn't the only level that teaches you things. The whole game is set up to teach players mechanics and then use those again in more difficult ways later on. 2-2, for example, is the first water level in the game. It starts similar to 1-2. Mario walks into a pipe and then falls to the bottom. But this time, it's not a dark cave, but a bright blue body of water. As you walk forward, you move a lot slower than normal, and there appears to be some coral ahead. If you try to run and jump it, you'll find you don't have the height to do so. Well, you're underwater and you don't have anything else to try, so why not try swimming? Hitting A second time will cause Mario to swim even higher. You also move a lot smoother when swimming than you do while walking on the bottom. Bam! You've learned how to swim, and if you're nervous about that blooper approaching, it can't actually hurt you while you're down the bottom of the ground. It doesn't go low enough, so until you figure out how to swim, you're safe. As for fighting the blooper, trying to land on top of it will quickly prove fatal. Luckily, this is the very beginning of the level, so now you've learned you can't hurt these things by jumping on them and how to swim. If you had a Fire Flower, you learn they can be disposed of that way like most other enemies. Just a little later, you find a pit with some coins in it. You might start to float down to collect them and find Mario moving down quicker than he has been. What you didn't realize was this was a whirlpool pulling you to your doom. But the coins are high enough and there's no other enemies immediately around you, so you have space to swim out, and now you've learned how pits work in water. Then you have 7-2, a copy of 2-2 but with twice the amount of bloopers. I said it before, but it is a neat way to increase the difficulty of a level with limited space constraints on a cartridge. It's also sort of a rudimentary way of introducing something and then showing it again but harder later on. A more traditional example of that is how they show you these floating platforms. The first time you see them is in 1-2. It's just 2 at the end moving vertically on the screen. Then in 1-3 you see them again, but this time some of them are moving horizontally. It's nothing crazy though, just set up like a staircase down, so you can even miss one and possibly land on the one after and be okay still. Next, in 3-3, they add 2 more parts to this. There's one platform here that isn't moving at all, unlike the previous ones. It's near the top, and it's the only way past this spot, so you land on it and it starts to drop. If you're quick, you can jump to the coins up top, but even if you take a second, you still have this huge bottom platform to land on. And now you know that if you see unmoving ones in the future, they're probably gonna drop. Up next, you see a pulley system with unmoving ones. Landing on it causes it to start to drop and the other side to raise. Another great spot to mess with it a little and learn how it works. There's a nice safe platform between the two should you make them fall, and a moving platform to jump to if you need it. Now fast forward to 6-3. There's more pulleys and moving platforms, except now the platforms are a little smaller. Then, right at the end of the level, there's a series of 4 unmoving ones. You've seen this before. You jump, and it starts to fall. But you're ready! Even if it takes you by surprise, if you have the reaction time, you can just keep moving. And let's say you did forget. The second one has 2 coins beneath the platform. How else would you reach those if the platform didn't fall? That should tell you, these are the same. It's not too often you can examine levels this broadly and see these patterns showing, but it's really cool when you see it and it all clicks. That's just how this game is designed. Coins are safe, Goombas are not. There's even one secret area where you go into the sky to collect coins. At the end, they want you to jump into a pit to return to the main level, but up till now, pits are bad. So they put some coins there. They're trying to communicate that this is a safe spot. This is seen a lot in Mario Maker as well. People make coin paths to show which way to go, and it all started here. So, how does this game hold up to the 3 pillars we established earlier? The story is simple, but it's there. It's enough to motivate the player to play, and there's stuff you can dig into if you look for it. The movement is incredibly tight and polished, and the levels are super well designed. This game is truly the godfather of all platformers, and it shows. This section of the video is just dedicated to parts of the game that really stood out to me. This could be because they were amazing or amazingly bad. One of the coolest parts of Super Mario was the Easter eggs and how much exploration was encouraged. Secrets were a big deal back in the day. Games had limited memory, so it was hard to find the space to hide things. Arcade games were more focused on being difficult and taking quarters, and there just wasn't many developed console games after the crash. The Atari games before it didn't usually have the complexity to include things like that, with a few notable exceptions. Famously, the first time a secret was called an Easter egg was in Atari's Adventure. Warren Robinette wasn't happy with how Atari wasn't crediting the creators, so he snuck his name into the game. If you take the bridge item to a specific room and use it to access a secret adjacent room, you can collect a hidden pixel by rubbing the side of the wall. Then, if you take that pixel to another room on the map, you can now go through a wall and see the secret message, created by Warren Robinette. People went crazy when they found this, and Atari actually almost pulled all copies of the game to change it, but thought that would be too expensive. Mario goes the way of just hiding tons of coins in hidden areas and items all over the place. There's hidden blocks like the one containing the 1-up in 1-1, or the famous warp zone itself in 1-2, where you have to ride a platform to the top and then jump onto the ceiling. The whole thing feels like something you're not supposed to do, but then you keep going past the regular pipe and find the warp zone. Bam! Developers knew you were going to do that and rewarded you for it. This was that thing that came from Excitebike, by the way. Miyamoto wanted players to have a way to skip worlds and get to the harder levels, but didn't want it to be available to everyone right away, because he was scared new players would just skip to the harder levels and not know how to play. So he hid it in these little warp zones to reward the players skilled enough to find them. That was a big thing people loved about the game, though. There was so much to explore and find in every level. The few reviews I could find from the time all praised it for this. Another thing people loved was the minus world. This was a glitch in the game where if you access the warp zone like this by glitching through the bricks and accessing it before it properly loaded, you could use the pipe and get thrown to world -1. This is actually supposed to be world 36-1, but the game wasn't programmed to display double digits up there, so it glitches to a blank space and appears to be -1. In the American version of the game, the minus world is just world 7-2 on loop forever until time runs out or you get hit. The Japanese minus world actually has a bit more to it. There are 3 playable levels in that one, though it still doesn't end up leading anywhere. Really, it's just the game spewing a bunch of gobbledygook as a result of unexpected actions that happen to form levels. It's completely unintentional, but it's become a legendary Easter egg, with Miyamoto even saying something along the lines of, "If it doesn't break the game, I guess it can be considered a feature." Some other fun facts I wanted to share as well. Did you know that according to the manual, the Hammer Brothers are actually twins? That's why you almost always see them in pairs. Also from the manual, the Super Mushroom was actually called the Magic Mushroom in this game, and it just turns Mario into Super Mario. It also specifically states that you, quote, return to regular Mario if you get hurt. Meaning, Mario is normally the super short guy. That's his actual height. The Mario we all know and love has been genetically altered when he's this tall guy, but he has a case of dwarfism. And all that comes from the fact that when they put Mario's sprite in place of the big 32x16 rectangle, they were worried he appeared too big compared to the rest of the game, and that you couldn't see as much with him being that big. That's when they added the short version. Then you get the Magic Mushroom to become Super Mario. Just more design choices that came from limitations that would eventually go on to become famous parts of the franchise. There's also a few weird things that people tend to complain about that I did want to address in defense of Mario. For the NES version, when player 2 is playing, they actually can't pause the game. And if you want to play with 2 people, you have to have 2 controllers. By that, I actually mean you just need one, and when it's time for player 2 to play, you just have to swap the controller port to player 2. But there's actually logical reasons for this. It all stems from the Famicom, which is the Japanese version of the NES. The console has the same internal hardware but was made different externally, as you can see here. See, the Famicom actually comes with 2 built-in wired controllers, as in they don't come unplugged. That's why you seemingly have to have 2 controllers even when only one of you plays at a time, because in Japan, you'd always just have that second controller. It's more inconvenient to have to pass it over. As for the pause button, the second controller straight up doesn't even have one. The code for the game is the exact same in America and Japan, so there just wasn't a reason to make code for handling a start or select input from the second controller. It's just a few things that seem weird, and I've seen people complain about them as inconveniences, which they are, but they're done so because of the hardware design of a different version of the console. And if you're wondering, they actually do have a good reason for not giving the second controller the start and select button on the Famicom. It's because they had a speaker put on that controller so you could shout into it. I am not joking. It's honestly kind of wild, but very cool for the possibilities in other games. An often underlooked at part of a game is the music. Whether you know it or not, it sets the tone for whatever it is you're doing. It's the kind of thing that you might not even notice until it's not there. Take Space Invaders, for example. The game features a steady beat that can barely even be called music. But as you eliminate more ships, the tempo speeds up, making everything feel a lot more tense. The pounding beep as the final ship gets closer and closer until you've got it! And the beat tones back down. But what if, instead of using music to create an emotional response like the tension in Space Invaders, you used it to anticipate the physical experience of the gamer based on the inherent rhythm of the gameplay? That's what Koji Kondo aims to do when he writes music. Kondo was convinced that game sound could lessen the gap between Mario and the hands that moved him. When he first designed the ground theme, aka the most famous video game song of all time, they hadn't had Mario moving around the game just yet. It was only a blue sky and the greenery in the background, so he wrote the piece to match that. A more laid-back summer stroll type thing, but it wouldn't match the rhythm of the movement. After he actually got to play the prototype, he was able to make the current version, and it didn't receive any further changes after that. There was one part that stayed the same from both versions though, a triplet part that had a groove that suggested moving forward. That's the only description we were given. Now, there are only 2 triplets in the piece, and my guess is it's the first one near the beginning, as that has more of a moving forward approach with the climb up. The later one slides down and feels a little looser to me, but I could totally be wrong there. As for the version we did get, there are notes in some old material that said it needed to be above ground, western sounding with percussion and a sound like a whip. True to form, the song does sound very open. It's not the focus, but there is a constant percussion keeping the momentum up. The whole piece makes you want to move. It's bouncy and energetic, and you can almost hear where the whip sound could have gone in the opening sequence. Before I move on from the ground theme, did you know there's actually only 11 unique bars in that song? The piece just has some strategic variations and repeats that make it seem longer, and it really works. When it came to saving memory, the music was no exception. Even the game over theme is just a variation of the overworld ground theme, which is great for both space and also just keeping it thematically relevant. As for the other pieces, the underwater theme was actually the first piece Kondo wrote. He said it was just really easy to imagine when he saw the game. The song itself is a waltz, a graceful movement in 3/4 time that feels light and almost wonderful. It truly matches the movement of swimming in the space-like underwater scene. Next up, we have the underground theme. This one is sick and probably my favorite piece to talk about. It's so unnatural. It's chromatic and has meter changes and constant ebb and flows in the rhythm. They say nature abhors a vacuum, and Kondo heard that and went, that sounds neat, and added full beat and a halves of silence between phrases. So you'll have 16th notes playing, a beat and a half of silence, which is incredibly hard to count when you're not expecting it, and even when you are, it's not easy. Then, that gets interrupted with 16th note triplets into 8th notes, back into 16th triplets, into 8th note triplets, into a bar of silence. The whole time you're feeling uneasy and out of tempo. It's hard to get a lock on the beat, and it's designed that way. You just got dropped in a dark cave after the bright overworld level you just completed. It's supposed to feel uneasy, and it works. I love it. There's also, of course, the Starman theme, which is just alternating between a major 7th and a minor 7th, with swing 8th notes keeping the tempo up. It's something that never quite resolves, but keeps moving forward. Exactly what you're supposed to be doing with the Starman. You need to keep moving forward and plow through everything. It doesn't resolve because while it's playing, it doesn't want a natural conclusion, but it keeps you moving forward. Then, we have the castle theme, and it is fast. It's 16th notes at about 180 beats per minute, which is stupid quick. This is less about feeling uneasy like in the underground as it is about feeling unnerved. Something is coming, and it's big. The piece continually resolves into itself, but then proceeds as if the resolution was actually the beginning. This, along with the speed, keeps the whole thing moving, and moving rapidly. It's scary. There's lava everywhere. Bowser is waiting for you, and you've just got to keep moving. That leaves us with the victory theme. This is the last piece of music in the game, and it feels so satisfying to hear. You did it! You can finally breathe easy. The princess is safe. The kingdom is safe. We've calmed down from the crazy 180 BPM in the castle to a still fairly brisk 140, but one that feels slower after the rapidity of the castle theme and the fight you just had. The day has been won, and it feels like it. That's not all there is to talk about, though. This isn't something I'd normally address, but the sound effects are actually quite unique in this game. Some of the sounds are actually duplicated to save space, like the going into a pipe sound is the same as when Mario gets hit by an enemy, or the power-up appearing sound is the same as the vine growing sound. It's also cool to talk a little about Kondo's inspirations for some of these songs, and you'll realize why when we hear them. Generally speaking, he said that he's inspired by most notably hard rock, Japanese fusion, or city pop as it's sometimes called, and foreign jazz, or as us Americans would call it, jazz. And if you dive into these a bit, you can actually find some of these inspirations, like the ground theme itself likely has some roots in Sister Marion by T-Square. Or how the Starman theme sounds just a bit like Summer Breeze by Piper. And possibly the most recognizable of the three, the underground theme has more than a few similarities to Let's Not Talk About It by Friendship. Yeah, maybe let's not talk about it. Jokes aside, I'm not trying to call Koji Kondo out at all. He's written hundreds of pieces and the man is a certifiable music mastermind. Inspiration genuinely does come from all sorts of places and many times without even realizing it. People take riffs from other pieces all the time. It's just how music works. Plus, I'm only able to play a few seconds of these pieces anyway. As a whole, they sound nothing alike, and what Kondo does with the arrhythmic beats and the underground theme is still the coolest. Check out those songs in full though, they're actually very neat tracks. Boss fights in games are something I place a lot of value on. These are where games test your mettle. They really put you through your paces to see what you've learned to this point, or to make sure you've got a certain skill down. They're often these dramatic encounters that tend to be quite memorable, and the final boss fight? Easily one of the most important parts of the game itself. This is a trial in everything you've learned, your experience as a whole summed up right here, and oftentimes, this is the last taste of the game a player has. It's already fairly uncommon, especially nowadays, for players to beat games, and even more so to keep playing after they've done that. So if this is going to be the last thing players see before turning it off, it needs to be memorable. Now, it shouldn't be a surprise to anyone that the final boss in Super Mario Bros. Is, of course, the legendary King Koopa himself, Lord Bowser. I don't think there's any big reveal there or anything, so instead, I just want to talk a bit about what we know as far as Bowser's origins. His inspiration actually came from an old Toei Company film, Alakazam the Great, which is a Japanese musical anime based on the 16th century Chinese novel, A Journey to the West. There's a character in the film known as King Gruesome in the English release that is an evil ox king. That's actually why Bowser has horns. He was supposed to be an ox kind of creature, but the first drawing Miyamoto didn't appear that way. Tezuka actually thought it looked more like a turtle. This made more sense given he led an army of turtles, so it worked out. we ended up getting a Chimera-type beast with a turtle's body and an ox's head, though he's still looking a little more ox-like in the Japanese box art of the game. That's actually hand-drawn by Miyamoto. Random fun fact, Bowser ranks second on IGN's top 100 list of memorable video game villains of all time, just behind GLaDOS from Portal at number 1, but still beating out the likes of Ganondorf, Sephiroth, and apparently the actual Nazis, who took 6th place. Besides both being in the top 10 of an IGN list, another thing Bowser has in common with the Nazis is that they've both participated in the Olympics, which is more than you'd think there'd be. As for the actual boss fight, the battle itself isn't particularly interesting, but the level as a whole, that's where the real cool stuff is. All 8 worlds in the game end with a castle level where you have to run through one of Bowser's castles looking for the princess. In the first 7 of these, you fight what looks like Bowser, but actually turns out to be a fake Bowser. The only way you'd know this is if you beat the boss with the fire flower instead of with the axe. Upon killing the first 7 Bowsers, you'll discover that each of them were actually a regular enemy wearing a Bowser costume. You only get to see this on their death animation, where the dead sprite of whatever enemy it was flies up after being hit with fireballs. In order of appearance, World 1 has a Goomba, followed by a Koopa in 2, then a Buzzy Beetle in 3, a Spiny in World 4, Lakitu in 5, a Blooper in 6, and a Hammer Brother in 7. I can't find any actual reference to fake Bowsers in the manual or anywhere else, which to me is just a neat thing to find. And of course, defeating any of these 7 don't actually yield the quote, homely looking Princess Peaches, as one reviewer of the time called her, but one of the Mushroom Retainers, a servant to the royal family. Not yet called Toads, though that's clearly what they'll become. As for the levels themselves, I just want to spend a few minutes going over the designs, because none of them are too long and they're all pretty fun. World 1-4 is just a quick jaunt over a couple lava pits and past some fire bars, which are actually an enemy originally designed for The Legend of Zelda, which was being made at the same time as Mario, but they thought would fit here. There's one mushroom, a few hidden blocks, then the first fake Bowser. This one doesn't pose much of a challenge as there's a moving platform easily reachable above him. Hit the axe and you're golden. To skip ahead, World 6-4 is actually one of the duplicate levels. It's a repeat of 1-4 except with every firebar turned on and the addition of little fireballs called Potobos. The mushroom is still there though, as are the hidden blocks. This time, the blooper Bowser is guarded by an additional Podobo. Back to 2-4, we kick things up a notch. This is the actual introduction of Potobos. We also see a split path here guarded by some fire bars and a gap with moving platforms and fire bars on both ends. Some more free coins and lava pits and you're at Bowser. This time some blocks above you make it a bit harder to jump him, encouraging the player to run under this one. Again, repeated later on is 5-4, a duplicate of 2-4 with additional Potobos, all the fire bars turned on, and the last Podobo guarding Bowser. 3-4 has a new design with a series of short hops over both Potobos and fire bars. A mushroom respite being guarded by a lava pit makes this one a little precarious but not impossible. More fire bars and Potobos lead to a new brick design over Bowser's lair, but running under him will lead you to a swift victory. This one we won't see repeated. 4-4 and 7-4 are where things get real interesting, and is the main reason I wanted to talk about these. These levels are actually mazes. You have to choose the right path or the level loops on you. The first part of 4-4 is simple enough, either up or down. To me, my gamer intuition suggests that the top one is correct because it looks harder. You have to run across a series of one-block gaps, which might not be something everyone knows how to do. There's no actual indication of this though, it's just a feeling I have, which happens to be the correct one. The second part is 3 choices now, top, middle, and bottom. Again though, the bottom path feels like the most inconvenient one, if that makes sense, which I would read as the correct one since it's easier to go to the top and middle paths. To me, this is Miyamoto sitting there thinking, what will the player want to do? And my responses to that end up being the right ones in this case. There's no obvious indication, but I'm alright with it. Plus, it's a really short loop anyway, and you have plenty of time here to do all the wrong choices first and still make it. One fight with Bowser and you move on. 7-4 is also a maze, but a different one. After getting past these falling platforms we've seen before, you get an interesting choice. You have to do the right path 3 times to advance. I don't know what it is, but going bottom, middle, top just feels normal to me. I can't explain it. I just look at it, and that's what my initial thought is. Even if you're wrong, there's just 12 choices, and each choice takes only a couple seconds to try. You're still going to be here for just less than a minute if you're really choosing the wrong paths. The second one is where things get harder. You first have to go through the top, then the middle one while jumping the gaps, and then jump back to the top. It's weird, but it also fits the game's MO about exploring. I can just picture a kid in the 80s mapping out the possible choices to get the right one and getting so excited finally figuring it out. It's not a puzzle with a lot of solutions, and you quickly find out if you're wrong. It might take a few minutes to do, but for a kid back then, that's a really cool puzzle you could put in a platformer like this. You couldn't always do complex things, so in my opinion, this works. That leaves one level left. The final level in the game, World 8-4. 4. This one is another maze, but with pipes instead of just choosing the right path. It's pretty brutal though. If at any point you choose the wrong pipe, you get sent back to the very beginning. But again, this feels fairly intuitive to me. The first segment has the correct pipe right after a lava pit with a moving platform. That's the hardest part of the section, so putting the right answer there makes sense. The second segment has a few pipes with enemies patrolling and then a pipe that appears impossible to reach, so of course, that's the one it's gotta be. By the time you've made it to the last level in the game, it's incredibly unlikely you haven't found a hidden block here and there, so you start hunting around and then you find it. The right answer. The third section is just some cheeps flying at you and a few piranha plants to jump. The last pipe is after a lava pit and is the only real challenge, and what do you know, that's the right one. Now you're in a short water segment because, remember what I said earlier? This is the final boss level. It's all about testing everything you've seen up to this point. All the enemies are here, except Lakitu. You're underwater, you're going through pipes and mazes, jumping lava, riding platforms, it's all here! After this last swim, you have what is probably the hardest part of the level. This one stupid hammer brother that is just impossible to... You have this one hammer brother and a Podobo jump protecting the true Lord Bowser. Passing them, the fight is a straight one-on-one. No Podobos or bricks in the ceiling, just King Koopa, his fire breath, and a whole lot of hammers. It is possible to jump him if you get lucky, and if you're skilled enough to have a fire flower, then by all means take him out that way. I prefer the classic run under when he jumps and grab the last axe, send him plummeting to his fiery demise. After all that, you're finally reunited with the princess, and she's ready to present you with a new quest, should you choose to accept it. This extra quest is the same game, but every Goomba is replaced with a Buzzy Beetle, and I think all the platforms are the small versions, but besides that, same thing. This level is seriously my favorite in the whole game. It's truly the culmination of everything you've done up to now, and that's really impressive for an NES title to do. With Bowser beaten, let's take a quick look at what happened after. For starters, it saved video games. Okay, that's overselling it a little bit, but it did restore faith in the home console market and lead us to where we are today. From 1986 to 1988, the NES sold around 24.5 million units. They were around 80% of the home video game market, and by Christmas of '89, it was estimated that 1 in 5 American households had a Nintendo. There was even a fear of a monopoly from some companies in the UK at the time, but it was actually this huge market hold that really helped consoles. Because Nintendo was in control of their hardware and the secret chips they were using, it made it so other publishers couldn't just pump out mindless garbage and flood the market again. Eventually, some companies would figure out how to sort of make games for the console, but they were prone to breaking and overheating, so Nintendo created the official Nintendo seal of quality. This went on to all officially licensed Nintendo games to show that it was legit, and it's actually still used today. Eventually, Nintendo would branch out and let other developers work on NES games, but on Nintendo's terms. This would happen only under exclusivity contracts, which had the extra caveat that companies could only release up to 5 games a year on the system. This kept the titles limited, but ensured higher quality games and a trust in the company. That was the real secret to their success at the time. Games like Super Mario Bros. That people knew were good. Super Mario was actually so good, even by 1990, just 5 years after it was released, there were magazines referring to it as one of the all-time classic video games. A national survey also taken in 1990 found that Mario was actually more recognizable than Mickey Mouse amongst American kids. Super Mario Bros. The Complete Strategy Guide was even the best-selling book in both 1985 and '86 in Japan. The game would later inspire both Sonic and Mega Man and countless other platformers over time. It popularized the genre in a way not seen before. The game would go on to sell around 40.24 million copies. It is worth noting again that this did become a pack-in title for the NES, which tends to boost games on the highest selling list, but I digress. As a franchise, Mario is the single best-selling video game series of all time, having sold over 957.42 million games as of September 2025. If you want to get more specific, just the Super Mario franchise alone is the 6th best of all time at 446 million copies behind Grand Theft Auto, Pokemon, Call of Duty, and Tetris. And as a standalone title, it's currently the 10th best-selling video game of all time. Pack-in title or not, this game sold well and left one of, if not the biggest imprints on gaming history. With all that being said, it's time for final thoughts. I've spent a lot of time trying to think of criticisms I have about this game, things that I didn't like or don't think hold up. The closest I can come to is that the mazes were a little hard and I had a little trouble, but I think playing it on my own, I don't think I would have minded it. I felt like I understood what was happening right away and I just had to figure out the right path. Even with no obvious thing like, this path looks different, there's subtle things that might make a player do one thing or another. Past that though, the sprites are incredible for what was possible. The controls are tight, the physics are consistent, the level design is fun, the levels themselves feel big, the world is bright and enjoyable. The music is literally the most recognizable video game music of all time. I mean, this game is a masterpiece. And you know what? I'm okay with that. There doesn't have to be something wrong with it. Is it the best game ever made? No, obviously not. We're always going to be breaking new ground, innovating with what can be done, making new and exciting experiences for players everywhere. There will always be something more fun. But is it fair to say this was the best they could do with what they had? Absolutely. They pushed the limits of what could be done and saved the home console industry. I mean, would someone else have done it if they hadn't? I don't know, probably. Do you really think no one else would have said at any point, like, hey, maybe we can do something with those video games actually? But they didn't. Nintendo did. And this was the game Nintendo did it with. So, with both the game and all of that context in mind, I am proud to give Super Mario Bros. A perfect 10 out of 10. Over 38 years later, and this game is still worth your time. If you've never played it, I highly recommend it. And Nintendo has made it super accessible too. I think I own at least 4 copies. Go play it yourself and see if you think it holds up. If you've watched this far, you might as well see what the hype is all about.